One of the great dilemmas of our early pioneer days in the state of Washington was, how do we get across the rivers? And as early as 1890, the Keller Ferry started to operate here on the mighty Columbia River. At first, there were just farmers crossing with animals and horse-drawn wagons, and they began ferry boat service, often with a scow, horses pulling the scow across the river. And then the dam was built below us. The river became wider and the ferry became bigger, and then the cars got bigger and bigger, and the demand became bigger. Operated continuously. The state of Washington maintains and runs this ferry today, not privately held anymore, and it's free. It's a beautiful ride, and if you haven't seen it, you should come and enjoy it. The Keller Ferry truly is one of my favorite places. Well, today we're right here in the center part of our state, in a little place called Beverly, Washington, where the mighty Columbia River flows below the dam advantage, and it's a beautiful, beautiful day. You know, in 1981, the legislature had a unique opportunity to purchase the old Milwaukee Road right-of-way all the way across our state from Teco, Washington to North Bend at the top of the Cascades. The legislature made that move. It was controversial at the time, but they made the purchase. And ever since then, they've been working towards a cross-state trail. And the railroad bridge is now reconditioned and reconserved for the use of the general public as part of the Cascades to Palouse Trail. You can walk it, you can ride a bicycle on it, you can travel it, you can see it. It's probably the most majestic, beautiful part of the central Washington hills and valleys. Come and enjoy it. In these beautiful hills of central and eastern Washington, this is an opportunity for each and every one of us as Washingtonians. Well, this trail and this bridge are certainly one of my favorite places.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Republican Leadership Media Availability for Week 12 of the 2025 legislative session. I'm Kimberly Wirtz, Communications Director for the Washington State Senate Republicans. Joining us today are Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th Legislative District, Senate Republican Caucus Chair Judy Warnick from the 13th Legislative District, House Republican Deputy Leader Chris Corey from the 15th District, and House Republican Caucus Chair Peter Abarno, also from the 20th Legislative District. And we'll start off with opening comments from Senator Braun.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. Week 12, so we're getting close. It's getting down to crunch time. You see a lot of activity over the last week on budgets, on enormous revenue packages from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And then, of course, in the meantime, we're finishing up just before policy cutoff tomorrow, and we'll get into the fiscal review of the budget. So I'm just going to repeat our priorities for the year. Public safety, I think the big item, very disappointed not to see the additional funding for law enforcement at the local level in the Senate Democratic budget. This is something that we've pushed on for a number of years, something that Governor Ferguson has insisted that he would like to see in the budget, and something apparently the Senate Democratic folks are not willing to fund. So that should be interesting how that plays out. Wrong move from my perspective for the state of Washington. We got a long way to go, and while this isn't going to solve everything, it would have been a good first step. On affordability, by far the biggest item for discussion is these enormous, shocking, surreal, stunning, whatever word you want to pick, amount of taxes proposed by the Senate Democrats, $21 billion. And that is, and of course, if they do their sales tax reduction, which I think was shot down by the House Majority Leader immediately, they'd be back down to only a mere $18.5 billion, but still far and away the largest tax increase ever proposed in our state. It's just enormous. And what they're saying is it's all they're just taxing the wealthy, but they somehow neglect to talk about the property tax. And I want to be clear, property tax is a very regressive tax. It is too high in our state. It is forcing folks out of their homes. It is forcing up the rent levels in our state. And it is assumed in the Senate Democratic budget. So the nonsense they put out that these are just authorizes locals to increase taxes. One, locals already can if they go to the voters, but two, they take that assumption right in their budget. That's going to go directly to the cost of living for folks who are struggling here in our state already. And then finally, K-12, and I'd say that's a little bit of a mixed bag. There were some very aggressive funding bills that passed off the Senate floor. Many of us support them because we think they're headed in the right direction. Both the material supplies and operating costs bill that I think is important for our schools, and a very large special education bill that I supported. I was one of the sponsors and I supported, although I've been pretty clear that I don't think we can afford to be quite that invest quite that much in special education in a year like this. So it's good that they're finally willing to step forward. It's just unfortunate they weren't willing to step forward in this way a couple years ago when we had a huge surplus and we could have done it without new taxes. Lots going on. I'm going to stop right there and turn it over to Chris Corey from the House.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Braun. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy April Fool's Day. House last night passed their version of the operating budget, which seems fitting that it went off just a little after midnight. The budget assumes the largest taxes in Washington State's history, and it's all based on a fabrication that these are needed now. At the same time, we heard stories about having to make tough decisions. We're growing our budget 8%. We're raising billions in new taxes, and then we're pocketing the money away in other areas. So, last night, House Republicans, led by our appropriations ranking member, really led a fight to try to restore some critical funding to, the most needed, the most vulnerable in our community. And it was frustrating to hear no after no in a variety of areas. again, I think the focus on the second half about this budget is that it, again, relies on a ton of new taxes. In addition to what, Senator Braun said, we've got taxes on beverage containers, increasing fees on Discover Pass, liquor licensing, increasing hunting and fishing fees, Airbnb, other short-term rentals, new ticket fees, more car rental taxes, additional taxes on cell phones, taxes on firearms, tax on duty-free stores, tax. All because we're claiming that we are in a budget shortfall that is entirely fabricated, in my opinion, completely unnecessary to do this at the time. But yet here we are. House Republicans spent about 8 hours last night on the House floor trying to restore some sanity to this budget, which was basically resoundingly defeated. So that's where we're at this morning. We're going to continue to fight for Washingtonians and for fiscal sanity. So with that, I think we're going to turn it back over to Kim and open it up for questions.
Terrific, thank you. We'll start with Carlene Johnson from Center Square. Go ahead, Carlene.
Hi, good morning. My question is, when Governor Ferguson has his budget-related press conference this afternoon at 1 p.m., do you have any expectations for how that will go? Is he going to endorse all these, revenue increases, tax proposals from the majority, or are you holding out some hope that he's going to say, no, I can't support that? Do you have any hopes or expectations for what he'll say this afternoon?
Well, he was pretty clear at the beginning of the session that we needed to not look to new taxes first, that we need to have savings. He's proposed a number of savings ideas in a few weeks ago. So I think this is a test. I don't know what he's going to say, but if he sticks with what, he's consistent what he said before, he's going to push back. And he said the wealth tax is a bad idea. And I think maybe the most important thing he has said, in my view, is he says he doesn't want to go through this in future years. Well, if he really means that, he's got to push back. He's got to say, no, fixing a spending problem by more taxes and more spending isn't a solution. So I have no idea what he'll say, but I'm hopeful he'll be consistent with what he said in the past and provide some balance to these outrageous proposals from both the Senate and the House Democrats.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I based on what he has said thus far, I'm going to hold out hope. By all accounts, from both comments he's made and from comments that, I've heard in conversations with a lot of his longtime colleagues, allies, and so on, is that, he is fiscally very conservative and is, doesn't want to waste money. So hopefully, I guess my message would be twofold to the governor. One, think about all of Washington's family pocketbooks when you're doing this. Like you would think about yours and how we should treat our budget. But two, know that there's another way. I mean, the Senate Republicans have proposed a no new taxes budget. We've got other proposals. We are happy to sit down at any time and show how we can work together to restore fiscal sanity. And I would add, there's a lot of Democrats over there that I think want that too, but they are being drowned out by this mantra of more taxes, more taxes, more taxes.
Yeah, I think Chris hit on something. I think if he's willing to deliver that message, I think that provides some top cover for moderate Democrats that understand the enormous damage that these tax proposals would do to our economy and the impact to everyday citizens.
Carlene, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just my one follow-up would be, what's the worst of the tax proposals? Is it the property tax increase, the wealth tax? I mean, I'm sure you guys saw the comments from Microsoft's president to GeekWire about, his concerns about the payroll tax, the wealth tax, and what it's going to do. Is there, if you had your druthers to like gouge one of these out, what's the worst of it?
Well, I think this is like the inverse question of who's your favorite child. It's like, there's so many bad ideas here. We've got, job killing B&O taxes. We've got this wealth tax, this payroll tax for employers with more than 7 million in payroll. That's, probably one of the worst ones because like we've been saying all along, we tax certain things to have less of it, right? Whether it was cigarettes to try to get people to stop smoking, or whether it was carbon to try to, reduce pollution in our atmosphere. Taxing jobs is the easiest way to kill jobs in our state. And it's not theoretical, right? It happened in Seattle. They moved over to Bellevue to avoid the tax. And look what's happening now. City of Seattle last week, we've got a $47 billion hole because of that Head Start tax. I mean, we're not talking about like, well, economists may disagree on what happens. It's actually happened in our state, in our biggest city. What do we expect to happen when you do that statewide?
At 14th rate.
Carlene, I'd like to jump in. This is Judy Warnick. We sat through Ways and Means last night, and if we were to count the number of people that signed in opposition on a tax, it would be 5798. We had almost 44,000 people sign in to oppose the property tax, and that's 5798. So the people out there are the most fearful of our property tax proposals.
And I would agree with Senator Warnick. I mean, in Southwest Washington, I hear folks complain about, the rising taxes all the time, but the number one issue they are concerned about is rising property tax. I think that's one of the most regressive. And there's just so many different ways that the Democrats are proposing it, not only directly from Olympia, but also shifting it down to the local level to kind of encourage local governments to start raising taxes. That just, it's death by a thousand cuts. And I think property taxes is probably one of the most regressive ways to impact communities. And in addition to that, it hurts some of the better investments. If we're talking about passing levies and bonds at the local level, I think the one thing that hurts school districts and some of these smaller taxing districts is when Olympia comes in with the heavy hammer and starts raising property taxes, and it impacts, I think, some of those local investments. So for me, there are all a lot of really bad ideas. And if anybody stayed up for 7 or 8 hours listening to the House Republicans last night with amendment after amendment, we showed the framework and the pathway to pass a budget without raising taxes, or to at least have better priorities. And so, property taxes, there was an amendment there to cap that property tax. There were amendments on that operating budget last night that would have helped, I think, with the operating budget to pass something in the black and not have to raise $15 billion in taxes. And we had some of those on property taxes. So for me, I think what I'm hearing the most is on the property taxes.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Representative Warren is absolutely right. Horribly regressive, and that's not the only one, right? We've got regressive gas taxes as well, and additional B&O taxes that will impact working Washingtonians. And the Senate at least tried to pretend to want to end some regressive taxes by proposing a small sales tax cut that they probably knew going out wasn't going to go anywhere. But instead of moving us to, a better place in their opinion, we're now moving backwards.
All right, thank you. And next we will go to Jerry Cornfield from the Washington State Standard. Go ahead, Jerry.
Good morning. A couple questions. First, just tomorrow is cutoff for the policy from the opposite house. Are there any big policy bills that you folks are watching that are going to not advance that you're concerned about, or you already know are dead?
Yeah, I'm not counting anything as dead until we get through cutoff tomorrow. I think there are a number of bad bills, and particularly in the Labor Committee and in the Environmental Committee, also some in healthcare that we're worried about, things that will drive up costs, things that will increase risk to building, and things that will complicate our labor market, which is already complicated. But I'm hopeful that some won't move along, but I have no clear. I won't count that until we get through cutoff. Just not ready to.
Anything specific that you could say?
I can send you a whole list. You kind of caught me off guard there.
Jerry, as well as we do, nothing is dead here until cutoff. So that's a question better saved for for probably Wednesday morning, but
Thursday morning.
Thursday morning. Oh, geez. Yeah, sorry. That's my days are getting all blended. But it is, nothing's dead around here. We know that there's a number of really bad bills, and we don't want to bring life to them. I mean, I will say, on the abstract, there's, a couple bills moving that are really, really bad for Washington State. There's an environmental crimes bill that would make it more punitive for making a mistake in your operations than for committing actual crimes that harm real people and businesses. So that's one we're watching for, and there's a number of them, but I'm sure we will see you on Thursday and we can talk more about that then.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up?
Just a question for Senator Braun. You had mentioned the K-12 spending. Appreciate the ambitious spending, but maybe this isn't the year given the challenges, fiscal challenges. Do you feel the same way about another Republican policy idea, and that's shifting sales tax from the operating budget to transportation? It's in the next biennium, but it's a big number. Do you think this is not the time to shift $800 million in that manner?
Yeah, you're spot on, Jerry. I have mixed feelings about this. We've fought for this for many years. I genuinely believe this is the long-term solutions to stable transportation funding. But the idea that to do it, we have to tie it to this enormous new tax package in the operating budget, it just goes in the wrong direction. It doesn't really solve the problem. I think a better way to do it would be to step into it incrementally, if that's what we need to do over 5 or 10 years. I think you could still do that this year, start at a smaller amount. You could also take a different approach. For instance, you could maybe put the sales tax on electric vehicles into transportation now. It's a smaller number now, but likely to grow over time. So I appreciate that the Senate Democrats finally understand the importance of this idea, but I can't support it when it's tied to all these other operating taxes.
Great, thank you. And next I will go to Laurel Demkovich with, I believe it's Cascade PBS.
Yes. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to ask about the proposals to close one or possibly two of the state's RHCs. I know that there are a lot of feelings on both sides of that, and I'm just curious to know some of your thoughts, if you support closing one or two of those, and if so, why?
So we had amendments last night to restore funding for both Rainier and the Yakima Valley School. It has been, I'll be honest, one of them is in my district, right? So I have been very passionate about keeping them open because when you spend, for me, the last 7 years hearing from family members who have loved ones at Yakima Valley, as well as Rainier, they've come in as well as hearing from the workers about who they care for in the community. It's clear that this is a critical option that needs to stay open. Some of the arguments we heard last night for closing them is, well, they need to be in the community. And that's largely not an option for a lot of the residents that live in these facilities. They are the most, dependent of Washingtonians, and that a community setting has either been tried and didn't work or is just not applicable for them. And then you heard the other option of, well, just, there's other options. Just send them to another school, send them to another RHC. That doesn't necessarily work either when you've got loved ones that are used to a routine. If they're in your geographic area that you can visit them frequently, they know the staff, they've got all those relationships built up. You don't just move people from those to save a couple $1 million, a very, very, very small amount given the grand scheme of the budget. And not to mention that for a lot of these families, they can't afford to be traveling on a daily or weekly basis halfway or all the way across our state to see their loved ones. There's a reason why they were set up geographically. There is a way we can protect them as an option while giving other options in the community and other services as needed. The notion that this is a either or scenario is just wrong. And again, when you have these families, when you have these workers who come in together to talk about why they want to keep serving patients there, it's clear that I think we're we're making a very quick and short-sighted decision. Even if you were to agree with the premise of, yes, we need to functionally close these schools, you don't do it through a budget cut that like basically speeds out removing the residents. I think this is something that takes a lot of more planning than we're doing here. And unfortunately, it's, I think, a very short-sighted move and, as a way to save some money.
Yeah, I'm going to have a slightly different opinion and respectfully partially disagree with Representative Corey. I think, and I would differentiate between Rainier and Yakima. Yakima, was functionally, slated to close many years ago. It's kind of transitioned. It does have still, I think, a few of the long-term folks there. But largely it's moved to respite care, which I think is hugely important. So I am not a fan of closing Yakima because it's really moved to a different, to provide a different need that's very important across the DD community. Rainier, on the other hand, has struggled a lot in recent years. Several of the cottages have been decertified. The population is just by as a result of the decertification has moved down significantly. And I think, and we also have significant facility problems there. So I actually split on this decision. I think that Rainier, it makes sense to close, and it has to be done carefully. I 100% agree. These facilities, unfortunately, haven't in many cases haven't been used as intended for a long time. They're intended to provide services to the developmentally disabled to allow them to re-enter the community. It's not working that way. Many of the quote students are older with aging families, and I think long term it makes more sense to look for either solace opportunities to place them near their families, or perhaps, depending on their situation. Although I didn't like the idea when we did it, we are building a nursing home for some of the aging students up at Fircrest. It makes sense to me to find solutions for these families in the community at Solaces, at different facilities, perhaps at nursing homes for the more elderly and the more fragile. But for Rainier, I think it makes sense. For Yakima, I don't think it makes sense because it is, in my view, evolved past just the RHC role. It does much more that's very important, not just to that community, but to the entire state.
Laurel, I will add this, and I agree with what Senator Braun and Representative Corey have said, but, really the underlying message here is that, House and Senate Democrats are talking about how this budget is really balanced on the very wealthy. And this is a perfect example where, Representative Corey talked about some of the taxes and fees on, everyday working people and people wanting to enjoy the state of Washington through fishing, hunting, and hiking. But this budget is also is based on cuts to the most vulnerable. And so regardless of our decisions on what we do with Rainier or Yakima Valley, something like cutting this is saving a few million when you're leaving $3.5 billion on the bottom line, and you're raising massive taxes. So I think that a lot of this messaging is also about a priorities crisis. They're trying to cut the absolutely most vulnerable in our community, the folks who have families who require this kind of respite care for their loved ones, when they could be finding it in other things, and they're spending money on just really bad priorities to the real detriment of the folks who need it right now, while we're trying to figure out what we do with Yakima Valley in that transition, what we do with Rainier in that transition. So just kind of the wrong time, but regardless of the decisions, or I think maybe the viewpoint on what we do with these RHCs, it shouldn't be based on cutting funding for probably the most vulnerable when you're leaving $3.5 billion on the bottom line.
Okay, next we will go to Shauna Sowersby with the Seattle Times. Go ahead, Shauna.
Good morning, everybody. I have a couple different questions, completely different topics. The first one is for Representative Abarno. As I'm sure you know, in November, the State Auditor's Office released an auditing report on the behavioral health community capacity grants that showed that the Department of Commerce didn't comply with the requirements to make sure that that funding went to qualified applicants. So my question for you is, if you have any concerns about including more funding for that program in the 2025-27 capital budget, and if there were any conversations during the budget writing process about that program.
Yeah, and I don't know how much, and Senator Warner could probably talk a little bit more about how much was in the Senate capital budget. I think the House capital budget had about $130 million in some of those capacity grants. And there were discussions about, kind of what we call the burn rate, how quickly you can get it out, and whether or not you're getting it out for the right reasons and under the right scenarios. But we did have some discussions on that. This is the behavioral health is a huge part of the capital budget, and it's a growing part of the capital budget as we recognize the need in the communities and getting it out to maybe more communities and smaller communities, especially some of the rural ones who don't have the resources that larger cities have. So I guess, yes, we had this discussion. We've had this discussion with Commerce as well. We're talking about how we can put some side rails on that. But I do think it's a good investment. I think we have to keep it moving because we've started some of the pre-development and design work on some of these. So we have to keep this moving. But there were discussions about maybe putting a closer eye on how they're getting the money out, where they're getting the money out, and making sure that when we have some language in the budget in some of those provisos and some of the guidance that we're actually having some reviews over the summer and in the interim about tracking that to make sure it gets out.
Are you looking at any past projects on that at all to make sure that they are coming up to speed? Or is there going to be any sort of looking into that at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think whenever you start the early investments with pre-design and you're starting the early investments about these construction projects, absolutely. I think you look backwards and forwards. You have to look at what they're doing to come into compliance with the intent of what the legislature wants, as well as moving forward with any new capacity grants. So I think on both looking backwards and forwards, this is, and I've spoken about this before, and I think I've heard Senator Braun talk about this. Of course, he's my seatmate, so I definitely have heard him say it a lot. But, a lot of times the policy moves faster than the actual, the investment through the fiscal budgets. And so a lot of it's catch up. We pass these policies off the floor, and then we expect the fiscal budgets to actually build the infrastructure to make that happen. And I think this is a perfect example of that. Blake and what that decision and our trying to fix on that is another example of how, the policy on the floor sometimes moves faster than the fiscal budgets can keep up with it. But I do think we're moving in a good direction. We do have a good eye on it to start moving forward. But yeah, there's always some of that concern. We just need to do a better job to make sure that we're actually investing the money wisely and that we're having a good impact on that. So hopefully that answers your question, but over the summer, we'll be dealing more with this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then my second question is for Senator Warnick. The foster youth benefits bill, can you talk a little bit about why that bill did not make it across the finish line this year?
That is a very good question, Shauna. That was a bipartisan effort to try to give the foster youth who qualify for federal benefits, as you know, give them what is owed to them. And it seemed like it was too difficult for DCYF or whoever to figure out how to get the funds to them. How many millions of dollars our youth are missing out on is a good question. I'm not going to give up. We're going to keep trying. We had an amendment to study this. So when other states are figuring out how to give their foster youth their federal dollars, I think it's time Washington steps up and does the same thing. And it's not something I'm going to give up. We don't charge other youth for their foster care. Why are we charging youth that qualify for Social Security and other benefits? Why are we charging them for that? But yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm going to be working with a couple of the senators from the other side over the summer and see what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific, thank you. And let's see, next we will go to Mitchell Rowland from the Spokesman. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Good morning. Tomorrow or this afternoon, Senator Braun and House Minority Leader Stokesbury are set to meet with the governor. I was wondering if there's other non-budget related topics or points of concern that you intended to bring up during that discussion.
Well, I'm be cautious not to talk about I'm not sure exactly what we're going to talk about. The governor, I'm sure, has issues as well. I'm sure since it's going to be right after his excuse me, press conference, that his proposal on the budget and taxes will be a topic of conversation. Things that I think I'm comfortable mentioning that we've been discussing all year long are bills we have deep concern with, such as rent control, UI for striking workers, and some of the other problematic bills. The other one I would mention is the PEB-SEB bill that puts enormous pressure on rural hospitals and may actually lead to closing of rural hospitals if we're not careful. So broadly, we'll talk about the budget, about the taxes and his whatever his proposal is, and about bills that you've heard us raise concerns about over the last 12 weeks, 11 or 12 weeks. So that's generally the topics.
Mitchell, did you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next, we'll go to Brian Michael from Como. Brian? Nope. Okay. Let's see. I think I've gotten everybody. Oh, nope. Albert James. Wouldn't want to miss you. Albert, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to see if the caucuses had been able to talk about the highway use fee that was included in the House transportation budget and those revenue proposals.
Well, I'll jump in and say, yes, our caucus has talked about that. Generally, almost 100% are opposed to that. So whether it's going to be used to help balance any transportation funding, but we did not get a good reception from the Senate Republican caucus.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of my entire caucus because I don't think we've really had much of a detailed deep dive into it. But again, it's just, another tax on using, our transportation system to get to work. And it's going to continue to price out our working Washingtonians.
Albert, did you have another question?
No, I did not.
Okay. Looking at the list, I think I've managed to hit on everybody. So with that, we will wrap up with final comments from Senator John Braun.
All right. Well, thank you, Kim. And thanks, everyone, for being here. I appreciate the work you're doing. This is the critical time of the session for 2025 when budgets are being proposed, they're being negotiated. In this case, enormous new taxes have been proposed. And it's super important that the people of the state of Washington understand what's being done in Olympia on their behalf or perhaps to them, depending on your perspective. And I would just remind you that we're going to be focused on public safety. We're going to fight for funding for law enforcement. We're focused on affordability. And right now, that's really matters of pushing backs on enormous new taxes that are going to make it more expensive here in Washington. And we're going to try and find balance in our K-12 system where we properly fund it to a level we can afford within our existing means. So we'll see how the next few weeks works out. And I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.